Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of RAW Sport Quaran-Stream. Sorry, slight mic issues, but I hope everyone's having a good weekend. It's been we've had a big week if counting last Saturday. And so it's nice to come back to kind of normality, a bit of routine, a bit of the usual group panel that we've got today. There's not a lot of news. I'm just going to quickly plug off the top. If you didn't catch our Bundesliga discussion, our journalism discussion with Chris Williams, it's on YouTube. Please do, especially if you're keen to learn more about the Bundesliga and get a slightly more qualified perspective. Chris did a superb job of breaking everything down. And also on Wednesday, we talked to Nathan Ferguson from West Brom. Again, check that out. Hope you guys enjoyed that chat if you did. And so today we've got a little bit of news and a bit of Premier League awards, and so we'll bring on Joe Spagnoli, who was there for both broadcasts from this past week and today. How have you been, Joe? How have you been today?
I mean, it's life in general is an absolute mess owing to the circumstances of doing assignments under quarantine. But what you forgot to mention is the fact that only a couple of days after our interview with Nathan Ferguson, we were quoted in the Express and Stars report on Nathan Ferguson being more likely to join a Premier League team next year, assuming West Brom don't get promoted. So having spent the entire lockdown period complaining about trash transfer rumours in the media, we are now supporting these trash transfer rumours in the media with our own interviews. So how wonderful that RAW Sport has become an affiliated news source in the wake of this transfer story.
It's amazing, isn't it? How we're now fueling the rumors, and I don't quite know the name of the journalist, but first of all, appreciative that he took his time to listen to our interview and try find a scrap of rumor to put in there.
There was nothing. We did not insinuate a transfer to any club. We didn't even mention the links to Crystal Palace. We didn't try to imply that West Brom wouldn't get promoted. We didn't say anything like that, but they still managed to get a story out of it.
I mean, I'm just going to put this out there, that to anyone from a West Brom fan or another club fan who wants us to really get into, like, was he going to stay or go? Like, we're not here to put people at ease or make them uncomfortable. So that's probably why we didn't ask that. And so if you're wondering, like, if you're like, oh, they should have asked this and that, well, that's why we're not here to catch people out. Let's bring on Dan Ralph next, who's also here. Hi, Dan. How are you?
I'm all right. Coping, surviving, managing. I got an email from my personal chief the other day, making sure I was still alive, which was
more than I've
got. Looking forward to the show.
Yeah, this is a bit of respite, a bit of a break from everything. And let's also bring on Luke Edwards, who's now here.
Hello.
How are you? How was, obviously you and Joe had a Eurozone podcast come out on Wednesday, I believe. It was midweek.
It did, yeah. It feels like ages ago now. Time just moves so slowly nowadays. No, so we did something on. Well, this was Joe decided. I said to Joe, we hadn't actually done so we've been doing season reviews and we hadn't actually done an Italian League One yet. So he said to Joe, let's pick a season. We went for 01-02, and really fascinating season. Go and check out on our Mixcloud.
Yeah, absolutely, and we will loosely talk about it. I guess we can start off with the official return of the Bundesliga. Obviously, we all thought it was going to happen, and now we've got a concrete plan with actual games to look forward to, knowing when they are and etc. And I'll quickly just say we are hoping to do Super Saturday, the German edition, next Saturday. I mean, logistically and technically, I still need to work it out, but I'm pretty confident we can get it to work. So, just keep an eye on that, especially if you're looking to get to know more about the German game or you want to watch and commentate for us a live football game. Just keep an eye out on our post in the RAW Sport Facebook group, the 2019-20 group, and just join that group for any updates about our shows. But the Bundesliga's back now. I'll start with Dan Ralph because Joe and Luke, obviously, you guys joined me for the for Chris Williams discussion. So we've heard a little bit from you guys about the Bundesliga. Dan, what was Are you? First of all, I assume you are excited, but what exactly are you looking forward to from the Bundesliga coming back?
I mean, I suppose when I were, pre coronavirus, I never really watched the Bundesliga too much. I mean, I'd watch, Borussia Dortmund versus Bayern Munich and vice versa. But I'd never watched sort of, your average teams in the Bundesliga. And now I'm really looking forward to. I've already picked my team. My team will be Cologne. Don't know why. I just like the fact that they've got a goat on their badge. I'm really looking forward to seeing more of these players. I'm going to be looking at Leipzig players, Upamecano, who I always seem to hear about in transfer rooms. I don't think I've ever properly watched him play, apart from the Champions League. But just sort of watching these players who no one ever gets the chance to watch unless they follow the Bundesliga religiously.
Yeah, and I mean not obviously we will try and commentate on the first round of fixtures, but Joe, Dortmund Schalke, you can't get that is one of the biggest derbies in the Bundesliga. What a great way to start off the resumption of the 2019-20 season.
Exactly, Gelsenkirchen versus Dortmund, two of the historical biggest teams in the Bundesliga, two teams with especially now very different styles of play. Yes, they're not exactly adjacent to each other in the table anymore, but it's one of the biggest returns you could have, certainly the biggest game of next weekend. If we do a Deutsche Super Saturday, whoever gets that game, you've got the big one for next weekend, so good luck. I'm really excited for this. Credit to Dan as well for choosing a team and just throwing himself straight into it. That is just the best way to get into European football, I find, particularly with the Bundesliga. Just choose a random team and go all in with it. Really, they're all pretty welcoming. It's not like there's any hostile teams over there. Incidentally, there's actually a flow chart which came out a few days ago, which I'll send it over in a link. We could put it on screen in a little bit. That chooses it's how you choose like your Bundesliga team depending on what you like. So we could even go through that. But really, I mean, the fact that we have a concrete return of the top 5 European league this year after Ligue 1's already over, after the immediate futures of it's still Serie A and the Prem and La Liga are somewhat questionable. Cannot wait for this. And really, this Bundesliga season has been so close, so interesting. 5 teams still in with a realistic shot at the title. Let's bring it back. I can't wait for next weekend, assuming that it doesn't get delayed again.
Yeah, and Luke, like Joe said, there's a lot of just talking points. There's a lot of everywhere you go. There's a major story that could come out. Obviously, the top, you've got the bottom as well. Obviously, last week we mentioned Hertha Berlin. We mentioned all these mid-table teams that there's something interesting about them to follow. And what are you in particular excited for when the Bundesliga returns?
Well, I mean, there's a lot discussed about the title race. I personally think Bayern Munich will just go and take the title. I think they've got the best squad. They seem to have in Hansi Flick a manager who's finally managed to get the best out of the players that they do have. So in that sense, I don't see anyone other than Bayern Munich really going and winning the title this year. I think the most fascinating, I was looking at the top 4. I think the disparity between Borussia Mönchengladbach, who obviously started the season so well, but have dropped off in weeks before COVID hit us, and Bayer Leverkusen, who are kind of a traditional mainstay of the top of the Bundesliga. So that'll be an interesting battle there. You've also got to look at the lower end of the table. So you've got some big clubs who are actually at risk of getting relegated. Hertha Berlin, for example, we discussed before, invested a lot of money in their squad. They are not in a good position. They could very easily, particularly with the managerial changes they've had this season, they could be in a situation where they are looking at a serious chance of being relegated. We've also got the likes of Eintracht Frankfurt, who have overperformed, dare I say it, in recent years. But nowadays, had a very turbulent some players like Sebastian Rode, but there's a very viable chance that they could get dragged back into the relegation battle as well. So I think, yes, certainly looking at the top of the table, there are, as you said, Josh, some really interesting battles. But I think the most engaging and the best narratives that we're going to see are going to be happening at the bottom of the table. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah. Look, I didn't really have much to add personally. I think that everyone said exactly what I guess all football fans are thinking at the moment. Did anyone, by the way, watch? I mean, obviously this is the third league around the world that's been going on, because I believe Belarus, they've been playing football throughout, which whatever you make of that decision, it was an interesting one. And then
vodka and saunas. That's all you need to stop COVID.
Absolutely. And then I personally I wasn't free at the time, but did anyone here watch the Korean League, the K-League game?
I did. I watched the first half yesterday.
Okay, Luke, do you want to give a sort of report / what did you make of the game?
Honestly, I can't even remember the names of the teams who played. There was the blue team and there was the green team. There was a guy for one of the teams. I think it was the blue team. I think it's like the Sangwon Blue Wings. I think they're called something like that. But they had a setup formerly of West Ham, who his name is Dalian something. Again, my knowledge of the K-League is absolutely abysmal. But I watched him in the first half of that game. I thought he was very impressive. Played clearly a very good ball player and centre back. The quality is not the same as it is watching some of the top leagues. It's nowhere near that of the Premier League or La Liga or Bundesliga, which is why it's so nice that Bundesliga is going to be back because we're actually going to see proper top quality football. But it wasn't by any means abysmal. I was actually surprised by some of the quality of the players, particularly defensively. They seem to have a good organisation. Both teams were kind of hard to break down. One difference that I did notice was actually the quality of refereeing. Nowhere near as good as in the Premier League. They clearly don't have the same level of investment in their officials as they do in top 5 divisions.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like you said, it's great to have one of the big top 5 leagues back. And it sort of came out this week that Italian clubs are starting to come back to training. I think Sassuolo were the first teams officially to come back to training, and then other teams are thinking about coming back. Spain, obviously, the Barcelona. I think all teams pretty much got tested for COVID as soon as they got back to training, and then have been slowly in small groups, kind of slowly getting back into it. And I think June is when they're hoping to come back, which makes sense. There's no rush to finish these leagues, but I think June should be fine. And then, then it leaves the Premier League, and again there's not a whole lot to talk about in terms of the Premier League because I don't know about you guys, but it seems to be the same as last week. We're still in the same position. We're still trying to work it out. Still trying to logistically see, neutral venue, no neutral venue. It's still kind of the same discussion. But there was an interesting thing that came out yesterday about 5 substitutes. So teams will be allowed to make 5 substitutes in games for just to help out because of player fatigue coming back to these games. Obviously, it's from having done nothing for the last month. Obviously, it's a bit of a switch up. It was interesting, Joe, because I listened to, and I can't remember who it is. I believe it's Stevie Nicol from ESPN FC, and
one of my favourites.
Well, he made the case that it will disadvantage the smaller clubs because the bigger clubs have obviously got a bigger squad and a better squad, and they've obviously invested a lot more in their squad than say Aston Villa or Norwich, where it's their strongest 11, and then the bench, they don't quite compare. So what do you think? Obviously, I am kind of just putting you on the spot and just kind of giving you that outline of his argument. But what do you make of this of the decision to allow teams to have 5 substitutes?
Well, I don't know whether this is confirmed or I haven't actually seen the original Steve Nicol point about this, but going off the top of my head right now, I don't see a one-size-fits-all solution to the idea of potential increased injury risk, stamina problems for across a squad. Because you can legislate for 5 substitutions a match and have that parity across the league, but the truth is that's going to impact different systems in different ways. So, for example, Liverpool are going to be Liverpool are probably going to be more affected by their playing style with more games within less days than a team like Newcastle, for example, who, as I said a couple of weeks ago, sit off for about 18 passes before making pressure on the opposition's possession, which is just ridiculous. If you were to actually legislate that you need to rotate X amount of players in for each week, yes, that would affect the squads that were smaller or have inferior players. To be honest, there are a lot of teams higher up the table that have smaller squads than teams in the bottom half, but again, it's not a consistent decrease down the league. So I can see what Nicol's on about. Honestly, though, Josh, I haven't seen enough of this to be able to give you the solution. But with the summer of sport effectively cancelled, is there not enough time to delay this delay this slightly and get games played over the summer. Maybe that affects the transfer window, but it seems, again, like none of this is final. None of it seems confirmed at this stage, which honestly, with the way the situation's going and the fact that we even now do not know what the circumstances of this gradual decrease of lockdown is going to be, I don't think we should be rushing the Premier League into making any decisions immediately.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of, I think it was Gordon Taylor who came out this week and said football halves could be fewer than 45 minutes, which was a very interesting suggestion. I see Luke shaking his head. Luke, do you want to weigh in on that?
That's just a bad idea. Compromises the integrity of the game.
Yeah,
because you're not playing full football matches. I think because you have to take into account player fitness. If they're at a stage where they have a limited amount of time in which they have to fit in a load of games, they are going to have to find a workaround to help the players maintain fitness so we don't have excess injuries, which is particularly important when we've got hospitals and stuff which are under like stress and that kind of thing. I would say I like the idea of having rolling substitutions. I think it kind of makes sense. People talking about it, advantage of top teams. Top teams are already at an advantage by having the best players in the first place. I think the likes of Man City would get the most out of it, purely because they seem to have the biggest squad in the Premier League. I think it would affect teams like Southampton actually in the mid-table quite positively. They play a very high pressing style. If Hasenhüttl's able to rotate players in and out in matches, that could over a 90-minute match, that could make a lot of a difference for them. So I'd be interested to see if they opt for it. I think it's a viable option. It does have its problems, don't get me wrong, but if it saves even 2 or 3 players from getting injured who otherwise would have gotten injured, then that for me would probably be worth it. I don't think there is, as Joe said, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution to this, but I do think that is a step in the right direction and far preferable to reducing the length of matches.
Yeah, and I'll give Dan the final word and kind of just wrapping up this little kind of football news roundup, because what have you made of all these kind of suggestions? And
I mean, at this point, there's no certainty about anything really. You know, the 45-minute, to lessen a football match to anything less than 90 minutes just seems farcical to me. It's not a football match then, is it really? It's not 11-a-side. It's not under 11s playing football match. It's a professional game in arguably the biggest league in the world, so you can't start changing the rules just due to an epidemic. I think, honestly, at this point, I just want to say sort of just void the season. And I know that might seem biased because I'm a United fan. And I would say give Liverpool the title, but they'll always have an asterisk if you give Liverpool the title and you void the season. So would Liverpool fans even want that? Their first league title in the Premier League. Would they want it with an asterisk next to it, or would they want to go again next season and then win it over the length of a full season? Because if you give it to them, it's a slippery slope, as I've already discussed in previous live streams. So at this point, I'm just tired of all the speculation. I'm just ready to say, get it done with. Get it voided, and then you can start the next season. September, hopefully, maybe October, November, December. Anytime around that time seems realistic at the moment. But it means you can, start preparing for next season. Possibly look at how you're going to lessen the crowds. Maybe one person between 2 seats in the stadiums next year. But yeah, I can't see any realistic solution at the moment coming out.
I mean, I wouldn't say you're biased, because at the moment United are out of the top 4 and they have a decent run-in of the last 9 fixtures.
Exactly.
It would be in United's interest to keep playing and try and get into the top 4. And obviously, we know how much Champions League qualifying for it, how much it does in terms of signing players and marketability and all sorts of things. So yeah, it's an interesting take. And yeah, I guess we just have to wait and see, but very excited for the Bundesliga to come back. I can't help but think, and maybe, I'll try and get a French football journalist on at some point, but I can't help but think that it now feels like the decision to stopped early, it feels like a backfire, or at least, I don't obviously know all the intricacies behind the decision making behind it, but right now, PR wise, it doesn't look that great that they're the ones that have kind of stopped and everyone else has kind of found a way, or at least waited it out to come back. So but yeah, we'll leave that there. And I'm gonna briefly talk F1. So I'm Dan, Luke. I'm just gonna kind of just give you guys a little break. We'll come back with you guys in a sec. I only obviously this isn't going to be a long discussion, but Chase Carey, and I'm going to load up the comments. But while I do that, what do you reckon? What do you reckon about his comments that? And I'll look them up in a sec. But basically, he said there's a chance there might not be any races in 2020.
I mean, the chance that there will be no races, or at least very least no official races, having non-championship events, which, I mean, I can't remember the last time there was one of those. It certainly puts paid to Liberty's plan, Liberty Media's plan, I should say, of the biggest Formula One season ever, 22 races planned for the 2021 season, which would have been the biggest ever. That's absolutely not the case. The earliest race that's even possible at the stage is the Austrian Grand Prix, which is still some distance away. I can't even remember how many Grand Prix should have occurred by this stage in the season. So already the whole point is that we've already lost what is the majority of the Asian portion of the season. Grand Prix in Australia, Bahrain, China, the brand new Hanoi Street Circuit in Vietnam built for this season, that's gone. The financial implications of this may even be greater than the implications that we've seen on football already. The proposed new regulations for Formula One, which would have come in for next year, fundamentally changed the way the cars were built, driven, and the competition was made out on track. That's been delayed until 2022. That also has some pretty big implications for driver contracts. We don't know whether Daniel Ricciardo, for example, whose Renault contract runs out at the end of the year, we don't know what he's going to do next season, because right now the Renault don't have an option to extend that for another year. It seems like he's going to have to do something to get him for another year, and we don't actually know if he wants to continue. Sebastian Vettel at Ferrari is another instance of that. The confusion, again, much like with football, it's not going to be over for several months, because, again, the deadlines just get the goalposts of Formula One just seem to keep getting moved back, because, of course, it is a sport, much like football, based on transportation, based around moving around the world in global pandemic times, dangerous circumstances. So I think the decision from some nations to outright cancel their races, for example, the French Grand Prix at Le Castellet getting cancelled a few weeks ago, I believe on the same day that the League One season got called off as well. Yeah, I mean, this is a massively curtailed season already, with the amount of fewer races by comparison to what Liberty were proposing and planning at the beginning of the year. It doesn't feel like a real season. I can't think of a season since, realistically, maybe even the 1960s, that would have fewer races than what we'd see this year if the season begins around the Austrian Grand Prix time. So does it mean anything, even if the teams can go ahead and race for the prize money, which is so crucial to their existence? It may not even be worth enough anyway, when you consider that about half the season minimum has been wiped out by COVID-19.
Yeah, no, I'll just quickly bring people up to speed. So the F1 season, they are planning to come back around the start of July, which is, as you said, when the Austrian race is scheduled. Carey's comments, and I'll try and share my screen and see if that works.
I haven't seen these actually, so this will be interesting.
I'm hoping this works at least, and we're doing a bit of experimenting. Oh wow, it does work pretty well. Let me see if I can kind of draw it up a bit. But Carey said in a conference call, he said the goal remains to start the season in Austria in the first weekend. It's likely that would be followed by a second race also at the Red Bull Ring. And he believed it's possible to have a championship of 15 to 18 races. The plan is to push back the European races till August and September. Obviously no fans, and also the regulations that they were planning to introduce will be delayed for another few years. So yeah, some interesting comments. And to your point, I guess F1 is one of those where because you're transporting teams to different continents at all times, and with the current situation, you have no idea of one country how far advanced they are in terms of getting through the coronavirus, and say another country. So it definitely puts them in a tricky spot. And like we look at the US right now, maybe it's fortunate that they're scheduled at the back end of the schedule. The Texas race is normally at their back end, but who knows if they're going to get over that hump by then. So yeah, it's going to be it's fascinating. And I mean, yeah, Chase Carey, for him to basically say that there's a chance we might not come back it's it's sensible, but it's also there's a lot of realism there.
And there's another point to make about this. One thing that people may have spotted just briefly in Chase Carey's comments, and it's something that's been suggested for a few weeks in order to inflate the season with the venues that we have left, is the idea of hosting 2 races in a weekend using a reverse setup of the track, so driving around the other way. People who do not follow Formula One or understand the mechanics of it may not realise just how unbelievably dangerous a reverse race would be at certain tracks. It's fitting that in amongst the esports coverage that Formula One's been giving us of what's not a substitute for the season, but what an awful lot of drivers have gotten involved with, and I credit them for doing so. We've also been seeing professional simulators used to drive tracks the other way with the current Formula One cars simulated to see just what it would be like going the other way. So many of the tracks remaining on the calendar, think about Spa-Francorchamps in Belgium, Monza in Italy, even Silverstone in the UK, these tracks are not built to be driven the other way. The gravel traps, which are designed to stop high-speed crashes on these tracks, do not work going the other way because they're in different places. Barriers close up at different places, which would lead to head-on collisions. They're not as wide going the other way. They're not as suitable for overtaking, but you can't just tell drivers to go slowly. This isn't the ridiculous safety regulations or lack thereof of the 1960s. You know, this idea of reverse races with minimal to no preparation, I hope Liberty aren't considering this, because, you know, we saw a Formula 2 driver get killed last year going the right way around Spa-Francorchamps, going the other way at that portion of the track, you know, where you've got about 4 different G-forces operating within about half a second and cars going at about 200 mile an hour. You can't do that in Formula 2 or Formula 1. Don't do reverse races. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's very tricky times, and I'm sure when Liberty Media took ownership of the F1 sport, of the sport, I don't think they envisaged something like this would happen. And yeah, it's tough. It's really tough. We did have, in this kind of quick fire news roundup, the NFL schedule dropped on Thursday night, I believe. We're not going to go through the whole thing, and maybe that's another show where you, myself, and the rest of the NFL guys we had on a few weeks ago, maybe we break that down in more general. But the Buccaneers and the Saints opening weekend, that's a hell of a game to start off the schedule.
Yeah, that's been deliberately scheduled, you can tell. I mean, the NFC South is the division that's going to be getting the most attention next year. All 4 teams could potentially go for positive records next year, which I don't even know if that's possible within the NFL division system, but I could believe it. Honestly, all 4 of those teams look good enough. As for the 2 teams that could potentially make it to the Super Bowl from the NFC, the 2 that people are talking about the most are the New Orleans Saints and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Drew Brees versus Tom Brady, Mike Evans versus Michael Thomas, all the individual matchups in that game, offensively and defensively. Like, we want to see that happen. So yeah, I mean, that was clearly a very deliberate and tactical strategic decision by the NFL to put that in week 1. But again, this is in the USA. The USA has been hit harder than any country on earth by COVID-19. So let's take everything with a pinch of salt at the moment. I believe one of the coaches, I think it's the New Orleans Saints coach, actually is still recovering from COVID. So we're still, some distance away from being ready for that. We've already seen, the impact that it had on the entry draft a few weeks ago. The whole thing needed to be done more or less virtually. So I mean, we could potentially foresee the NFL getting delayed by a couple of months. Luckily, of course, it is a winter sport. There's no spring football league with the bankruptcy of the newly formed XFL, which, quite frankly, didn't have a chance to exist earlier this year. The possibility is there for the NFL to be delayed at least by a few weeks or months.
Yeah, I'm just looking. I mean, you can see here on the screen, and so can the viewers as well, the opening week of fixtures. The Texans at the Chiefs, for me, stands out. Obviously, that's a game. Obviously, JJ Watt, he missed a lot of last season. He comes back against Mahomes. That should be an interesting one. And then again, like you said, the Buccaneers Saints definitely stand out. And any other games here that take your fancy or?
I'm just trying to look at like which teams I generally follow. Well, one of the ones that immediately springs to mind: Los Angeles versus Cincinnati. Potentially two new starting quarterbacks. Cincinnati's Joe Burrow, who will be the starting quarterback now that they've released Andy Dalton, who's now joined the Dallas Cowboys, and Los Angeles Chargers, who have just drafted Justin Herbert 6th overall. We could see both of those starting on the opening day. Of course, the Chargers said goodbye to Phillip Rivers, now plays for the Indianapolis Colts. So potentially two rookie quarterbacks facing off against each other in literally the first week of their NFL careers. So, plenty of big games there. I'm just looking down. My New York Giants. Ooh, we host Pittsburgh. Tough.
That's a tough one. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how far we get down in terms of, because obviously training camps are going to have to begin soon, and squads are going to have to be cut down as well. So it's going to be very interesting to see. I guess the final. I mean, this one's a bit more general comment from me, but the NBA have started opening up their training facilities as well, which is going to be interesting to see the timeline on that returning. Interestingly, the commissioner, and maybe I can ask you about a bit of this. He said to expect there to be maybe that there's no fans until 2021, which is obviously devastating. And obviously basketball is a sport that relies on spectacle, so that's a bit of a blow. There's a talk about using Disney World, Florida, as a neutral venue, and Las Vegas, which is an interesting group of facilities. I guess it's a bubble. I guess you can sort of control what it is in the world of magic and the mouse. Yeah, I guess that. Yeah,
my reaction is summed up by my facial expression. I've got nothing else to say about that.
You can't blame them for trying. You can't blame them for being so innovative and trying to change it up. But yeah, I think that's really. Yeah, I think that's the bookend of all the news stuff. We have got your graphic up, so I'm gonna add Luke and Dan in a sec, and I'm just gonna add the graphic up. But Dan, you're looking at Clone. Luke, is there any team that takes your fancy before I try putting up this graphic?
I'd already decided that beforehand that I was going to follow Borussia Mönchengladbach just because of their affinity with Liverpool.
Oh wow, okay, yeah, that's a good shout. So Joe. Okay, I mean we're all looking at this real time, so this is the first time that I've certainly looked at this.
So this is obviously a flowchart, yes or no, or in the case of the first question, are you interested in winning? Yes, sometimes, or no. It's actually, in my case, it was very accurate because I ended up with my favourite German team, Borussia Mönchengladbach. Interested to see what you guys end up with. I believe this was retweeted by, might have been the English Bundesliga account, but it was definitely like a big Bundesliga-related account in Germany.
And I ended up Bayern Munich because I think I put I like winning. But that was just because I've supported Man United all my life. So
I've ended up with Werder Bremen.
Oh no, that's literally that I don't know what you call it. That branch is where I'm at, the hip alternative one.
Yeah.
And I know that there's one I definitely want to say,
but I consider myself hip and alternative.
Okay, that's good.
No, I'm going to go with. I'd go down the middle. Can I just merge Werder Bremen and Dortmund into one big club?
Well, I mean, if I don't know if people see my Twitter, but I'm advocating for Milo Rashica to end up at Dortmund, so that is kind of a merge, if you like.
I support Milo Rashica.
Yeah, I do as well. He's a fantastic player. Right, I think that's mainly it for news. Unless there's anything else that I'm trying to think of, but I don't think there is. So we can move on to the Premier League awards for 2019-20. And the reason why we're doing this now, obviously, yes, the season's not done yet, but it's fair to say that the remaining, when and if the games are resumed, it's going to be a completely different season. It's going to feel like a season of 2/3 and 1/3. Like, it's going to be obviously completely different, and it'll feel like a whole different thing. So we thought we'd kind of give our awards for the season up to March, February. It's weird because I can't.
It was like March. Was it my birthday weekend was the final one?
Premier League awards so far
So
Yeah.
mid-March.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out, I've just put it in the chat as well, is that BBC Sport decided to do their Premier League and WSL awards a few days ago as well. So we're not the only ones doing like this stupid early end of season awards.
Quite a while, the Athletic are all over it. The newspaper, well, the online platform, I suppose they are. They've done their team of the years for each league. So interesting to know about the BBC one. They put Bruno Fernandes in their team of the season, and he played 5 games. So I wasn't overly fussed about that.
Kylan Stillwood thinks Jared Bowen is one of the best wingers in the league, and he started 3 games.
Interesting.
Goodness. I've just seen that Watford apparently come out and opposed neutral venues. They're the third team to have done that. I think after Brighton and Villa. Which I don't know if it's hugely news, but yeah, I don't know if it's hugely news. That's just kind of they've done that, and like or not, they may get it, they may not. But right, let's get to the first award, and I'm going to try and mix up the kind of serious ones with some of the silly ones that we've come up with. Let's go with signing of the season. Signing of the season. I mean, Bruno Fernandes is obviously a candidate when you think about it. Let's go with So Dan, would Bruno Fernandes? Let's get this out of the way. Would he be would you be a candidate? Or where would you put him as signing of the season?
The whole season, then I think he would be certainly a candidate. But because he's only played 5 games, anyone can be good for 5 games. So no, I'm not going to say Bruno Fernandes. I would say Dean Henderson. I know he's a loan signing purely because of impact to the club. He's been brilliant for Sheffield United. They'll probably get him again next season. I know he's a United loanee, but I just can't think of anyone else who stands out to that degree as having been a great signing.
Yeah, it's a certainly good shout, Luke. I mean, Dean Henderson's up there. Have you got are there any other names that come to mind, or anyone who you feel is more deserving of Dean Henderson?
It's really hard to pick someone purely because you look at the table. Man City haven't brought in anyone really of note who's coming. I mean, they brought in Rodri, but he hasn't exactly set the team alight. With the Liverpool situation, they didn't buy anyone in the summer, so apart from Adrian, but he would be nowhere near that discussion whatsoever. Leicester, you could maybe you could put Dennis Pratt in the conversation, but again, uninspiring. Chelsea had a transfer ban. Manchester United, you could actually consider putting Harry Maguire in that situation, considering what he's done to that Manchester United backline. I think he's had an absolutely massive impact. I think you could put him in that conversation. The only question mark really would be the fee that they paid for him. £80 million is a lot of money. Does that actually make him, therefore, a good signing? Probably not, just because of the amount of money they did spend on him. Because you'd have to take into account value for money. I think, certainly Dean Henderson's a very good shout. Honestly, I'm struggling to find someone who actually stands out for this, because I don't really think there's been a standout signing across the league this year.
I don't think any of the big names. I mean, you think of the big name signings that were made. Christian Pulisic, who Kylan also included in his top 5 wingers of the Premier League. I don't think. It's not to say that he's had a bad start. I think it's just it was going to take some time for him to adapt, and he's not quite hit the ground running. So I wouldn't quite put him there. Joe, any thoughts about you? What about I'm trying to think of anyone that make. Yeah, that's another one.
Wan-Bissaka was someone I was considering. I'd throw in 2 names, maybe not the most inspiring, but they've certainly had one hell of an impact. My first would be Danny Ings of Southampton, and 20 million for a striker to have scored that's such a high proportion of the club's goals. I think it's fair to say that Southampton would probably be in the relegation zone were it not for him this year.
I wouldn't count. Danny Ings doesn't count. He was on loan with them last season, and it was like they paid the transfer fee this season, so I don't really think he counts.
Yeah, it's the same, I guess, with Raul Jimenez as well, who would have been another name if we're talking about signings made over the summer. One name I would throw in there, although again, I don't think he's he's not an inspiration. It's not like when we were talking about Mo Salah a couple of years ago. Would be Giovanni Lo Celso of Tottenham. He's received an awful lot of criticism, I think, unfairly earlier in the season. But actually, if you're looking at statistically Tottenham's midfielders, he's been one of the most impressive. The fee is far from ridiculous, high 20 millions. He's actually adapted pretty quickly, as far as I'm concerned. But again, we're not talking about someone who's absolutely lit the world alight. When people talk about Bruno Fernandes as one of the signings of the season, you're talking about the impact that he's had on Manchester United absolutely immediately. Yeah, he's only played for a few games so far this year, but the impact he has had is absolutely enormous. And it's as a result of him, and at least the injection that he's given Manchester United, that their trajectories went from that to that. This looks like a club that could actually recover in the short term, which is not something that we've been saying about them really since Solskjaer originally took the job.
I think one player I would chuck into the mix actually is Gabriel Martinelli at Arsenal, in terms of for the future and bringing a player who's actually had an impact immediately and is also looking like he could be a top Premier League striker for years to come. You could put his name into the mix.
Yeah, I think the two names I had thought of, and granted, they're not the first names people think of, but I believe Palace made the Jordan Ayew signing permanent in the summer, and that's he's worked very well. I think his goals have been crucial. I at the start of the season would have had Bjorn Engels, because I think he only cost £9 million or so, and that's for the amount of time he's played. He's obviously formed a good partnership with Tyrone Mings. Obviously, he's fallen out of the team a little bit. I was going to say of late, of the last Premier League games, he'd fallen out of the team a bit, but I thought he was good then. So if we're going to find a consensus, it sounds like it's Bruno Fernandes.
Okay, I'm happy with that. But and he has done great things for the club. I'd just like to see a bit more of him. But
we need to put an asterisk next to it. The season's not over. We have not really seen enough of him to say this 100%. But in terms of big money signings that have made a big impact, it's him.
Your wish is my command. There's the asterisk. So the next one that I've gone for, and it's the opposite. It's the opposite of signing a player. It's those players who kind of stick around, and you don't really know how they've stuck around, but they have. And it's the Jesse Lingard Award for kind of just sticking on a Premier League team, but somehow staying there, even though you kind of overstayed. You're kind of like that person at the party who's kind of just like was uninvited and is just staying way too long than they should. So is there any? I mean, I'll give you guys.
I'm going to chuck a rogue one into the mix here. Ravel Morrison at Sheffield United.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good shout.
Incredibly talented player, but
so much.
Yeah, terrible attitude. I think he's one. I'd also chuck in Danny Drinkwater, somehow still starting games for Burnley, even though he's not played properly in probably since like 16-17 season. I don't think he's a very good player whatsoever.
I think he's at Villa now.
There's so many. Joe Hart is another. I know he hasn't really been playing much this year because Nick Pope is a substantially better goalkeeper, but he's still at a Premier League club.
Jack Rodwell, perhaps.
That was ridiculous.
I would personally say Phil Jones. I don't know. I'm still picking up a wage packet. Solskjaer's cleared out a lot of the deadwood, but Phil Jones is still sticking around for some reason. So I'd put him in there.
Danny Drinkwater's at Aston Villa. I've just found out he didn't even last at Burnley. He then got shipped home and then off to Villa again. So
I wasn't even aware of that.
Yeah, so that is just extra fuel to the argument that he is. Joe, go on.
What I would say is that Danny Drinkwater has, unbeknownst to us, admittedly moved around quite a lot of Premier League clubs ever since that Doom moved to Chelsea. One player that is still at the same club, and what a surprise, it is Chelsea, has been on loan what seems like 1,000 times in his career. He's still only 27, was at the club last year, did not make a single appearance, and it's the same this year. Marco van Ginkel, the midfielder for Chelsea. How the hell is this guy still in the Premier League? He's still on their books. He's still on their squad. He's not made a single appearance this season. How is he still on a Premier League side?
He must have signed a contract another one, because when did he sign? He must have signed like, what, 6 years ago when he was 21 or something.
He started to Chelsea in 2013. He's only made 2 appearances since then.
6 years ago, he must have signed a contract extension. You can't. I very much probably had a 6 or 7 year contract. So there must have been one point where they thought he's worth keeping around. So let's give him a new contract.
It's probably went on loan. Well, probably because he went on loan to PSV for 2 years and was scoring basically a goal every other game. So maybe Chelsea were inspired by that somehow. But you only need to look at the last 5 years really to see a record of signings from the Eredivisie just not turning good in the top 5 divisions, the top 5 leagues of European football. So again, an odd decision by Chelsea why they weren't able to ship him off on loan somewhere in the Eredivisie this year. Again, I mean, there are plenty of names that could go forward for this, but that would be mine.
Yeah, Arsenal fans obviously will shout out Mustafi, and
he's not bad though.
He's actually been good under Arteta.
Yeah, I'm just saying. I mean, at the start of the season, and maybe at the start of the season after Xhaka's kind of, what would you call it? His walk off the field, his walk off sort of tantrum. I mean, yeah, some people might throw in there, but yeah, Marcus Van Ginkel's a very interesting one. I'd forgotten he was still I've forgotten he's still a Chelsea player. Which, oh man. So yeah, I guess, is there a standout name? Do we have a standout name?
I'm happy with Van Ginkel because
Okay.
I completely.
Yeah, I like that.
That's very funny.
Yeah, I like
I
that.
have no idea he played for Villa either.
Yeah, and he's struggling to get past Conor Hourihane, John McGinn, who's been very good, by the way, but he's struggling. The fact that he's gone from Premier League winning midfielder Danny Drinkwater to now struggling to get into a relegation-threatened team it's a stark fall.
Premier League winner now. Where is it? Burnley.
Yeah.
Villa.
Villa.
Yeah.
He was at Villa as well.
Yeah, I don't know.
He's only on loan at Villa.
He's only on loan. Here's another one that we thought of. The Graham Souness Award for unnecessary criticism of a player. Obviously named after Souness and Pogba's feisty, stormy at times relationship. And there's been plenty of players who have just got a lot of criticism. I think you could put Moise Kean and Graham Souness in one nominee. That's a nominee there.
Basically, all of the nominees for this are Graham Souness.
Yeah, I feel like Roy Keane might have said something about someone, surely. Like unnecessarily.
He deserves it. Like, I mean, recently, what did he do the other day? He had some weird party, some weird. It looked very sexual, which went on in lockdown. So he was reprimanded for that, and he hasn't been great when he's been on the field either. So I feel like any criticism of him has been deserved.
Is there any?
Obviously towards the start, so I don't know. Some people have been criticised him. There've been many criticisms. I think he's been very good. So I don't know.
Dan's audio quality has gone to the shadow realm, and we're hearing some echo, unfortunately. Maybe and that's all right. It's probably not your fault. But are there any RAW Sport personal vendettas? Now that Dan's gone, he criticises Sebastian Haller an awful lot this year whenever we do commentary. And Haller's failure at West Ham is so blatantly not his fault and is the fault of an unbelievably negative style of management, which has left strikers isolated for years. Maybe that's unfair. The amount of English pundits that criticise Joe Linton as well for basically the same issue at Newcastle.
Linton is a shout. Yeah, because he's played out of position by Bruce. He's not even he's not a striker, I believe, in Hoffenheim. He plays as a winger,
he's like a second striker. He's not. He's like Firmino, but kind of worse.
Firmino doesn't play 30 feet ahead of your incredibly negative wingers. So why the hell Newcastle would sign someone that played that way? And this is the thing. Like when you say terrible signing, it's not often. Well, often it's not a condemnation of the player itself. It's the operation of bringing him in and why you'd bring a player into a system that clearly doesn't suit them. If we're going to do worse signing, Joe Linton, especially for the fee that Newcastle paid for him, is on that list. It's an idiotic signing in the context of the extremely negative way that Newcastle play football.
Yeah, I mean, we had worst signing of the season as another award as well. So you could say Joel Linton is a double award winner. He wins the Graham Souness award and he wins the worst signing of the season award as well.
Yep.
Unless there's anyone else that we can think of that's been unfairly criticised.
No, but there is one that I do want to get to, and that's the Peter Odemwingie Award for questionable player behaviour. And I'll run through a lot of the nominees for this one because there's a lot. We start with Jack Grealish, obviously breaking self-isolation rules to go to a mate party. Mikel Antonio, I think it was Christmas Day, he crashed into someone's house in a Santa costume. We've got Jose Mourinho, Tanguy Ndombele, Ryan Sessegnon, Serge Aurier, and then there's one more player that's I've sort of forgotten here, but obviously they trained in a park. Moise Keane, he obviously broke Walker as well. There's a lot of players that have kind of just they've not looked good. Obviously, I know this is Premier League, but shout out, special mention to the Derby County players who I think it was October where they had that car. They went out drinking in a pub and then a car crash, and then now what's his name? Richard Keogh's now been sacked by the club. So there's that as well. There's been a lot of questionable player behaviour throughout the season. Does anyone want to venture another one or a standout?
Jordan Ibe is the one I'm going to put in. Or he crashed his Bentley into a coffee shop.
Oh yes.
And then drove off.
Oh my goodness.
So he's a problematic figure, Jordan Ibe. I don't know how Liverpool got. I mean, like getting £15 million for him is kind of problematic in and of itself. So I would stick Jordan Ibe in there for the.
It's almost problematic as getting 19 million for Dominic Solanke.
Yeah, Bournemouth need to have a look at their recruitment strategy again.
They do.
I mean, I'm trying to think. There is one that I'm struggling to think, but there was one I had in mind. Obviously, across the continent, Luka Jovic in Serbia broke self-isolation rules as well. That happened. But anyway, focusing on the Premier League. So we've got a lot of them are related to breaking self-isolation, with the exception of the Mikel Antonio one and the Jordan Ibe one. That's it. Do you put the Granit Xhaka walking off the pitch? Do you put that down as a candidate, or is that nowhere? Is that nowhere near the other nominees?
What was this?
When he walked off the pitch and he kind of the middle finger and all that, would you put that anywhere up there, or is that completely?
No, I think it has to count off the pitch for me.
Okay, all right.
Because I think you can't really count things that happen on the pitch because it's kind of it's more emotional as people get caught up in stuff, whatever. Whereas this is just problematic because you can't even remotely begin to justify the actions of some of these players.
Yeah. All right. So, I don't know. Dan, is your mic working? Just for. Okay, he's muted himself. Oh boy. Well, we love resolving tech issues live on air. Right. Dan, I have no idea. Dan, I don't think we can hear you. I don't know. Nope. There we go. Right. Anyway, okay, he's off. Right. Anyway, which of the self-isolation incidents do you find the most preposterous, the most ridiculous? The
Carl
more easy.
Walker's.
Did you say Carl Walker?
Yeah.
Purely. It was a. I mean, Jack Grealish is I don't know what he is. He's like 22. He's clearly not the best person in the world, but it was also early on in isolation. He broke the rules. He owned up to it as well.
He's the club captain as well.
Yeah, he did own up to it. He's inexperienced. He made a mistake. I don't think I don't like him. I think it was something the wrong thing to do, but I don't think it was as problematic as Carl Walker breaking isolation with a sex party. And then he's also been in the news yet again because he broke isolation to go and visit his family. And he's also experienced. He's in England. He's like a senior England international. Yeah, I think it has to be Kyle Walker for me. I think he's absolutely, he's done the worst thing out of all of the self
I can't help but think Kyle Walker is headed for a move outside the Premier League. Like, I can't help but think he's going to make a Kieran Trippier style move somewhere, just because. Which would mean Man City would have to keep Cancelo, but anyway, that's another discussion. Kyle Walker. Anyone think differently? I quite like the Mikel Antonio one, just because it's so random to have. It's so random to have crash into someone's was it their front yard on Christmas Day in a Santa costume. I do love that he did that. Just I have no idea why. I mean, that
the
to
timing
me
of it makes it better. The fact is, it happens at Christmas and he's dressed as Santa makes that substantially better than Jordan Ibe's one, where it's just a coffee shop. There's no extra details to it. Just make it absolutely hilarious. I would 100% give it to Mikel Antonio for that.
Yeah.
Plus,
cool.
It's a nice analogy for West Ham season. Absolute car crash.
I'm just adding down that we've put Joel Linton as a double award winner, which is staggering because you would not have thought that from this season. And Mikel Antonio gets the Peter Odemwingie award. Do you want to get to the one you suggested? The award you came up with?
The award I suggested. Which one was this, Josh?
It's to do with Rio Ferdinand.
This is the Screw You Rio Ferdinand Award for the player who has best overcome unfair criticism from English pundits, RAW Sport or otherwise. I'm not going to lie, I just created it because I want Jorginho to get an award this year. The absolutely ridiculous comments that Rio Ferdinand made in the early stages of last season, that Jorginho doesn't score, doesn't assist, and doesn't really defend. So what does he actually do? To which, of course, the answer is basically everything else. But Rio Ferdinand, of course, doesn't understand because he doesn't understand what a regista is. Jorginho has been Chelsea's player of the season for me by an absolute country mile. One of the best midfielders in the league. I would consider putting him in team of the season, even as one of the first options to go onto the team sheet. He's been absolutely fantastic. But the amount of criticism he was getting last year from people who simply did not understand what kind of midfielder he was. What an unbelievably positive season he has had, and it's so good to see people backpedal like mad on what were ultimately ridiculous opinions as to how supposedly bad his transfer was. Jorginho.
So we're just going to put this as the Rio Ferdinand Award. This is one of the awards where you know who's going to win it already. It's kind of just a ceremonial.
I'm actually going to put someone in. I've got my nominee for this. Jordan Henderson. Maybe not some specific pundits, but in terms of a general public opinion, I think it's done a complete 180 this year. Jordan Henderson's had, in my opinion, his best season in a Liverpool shirt. I think he's an absolutely wonderful footballer. What he's shown this year, I think what the key difference is with Henderson is that he seems to have actually figured out the role that he's playing. There were a lot of criticism earlier on when he in sort of like 2016 time where he was playing predominantly as a deep line midfielder. It was quite clear that he wasn't quite used to the position. People were criticising him, I think, unfairly for being too safe, passing the ball sideways too often. People just saying, he's nowhere near as good as half the England midfielders like Calvin Phillips, for example. It's just complete rubbish. And nowadays he's quite obviously England's best midfielder. He can play as a box-to-box midfielder absolutely wonderfully. His passing range is absolutely superb, and he's actually added goals to his game this year as well. The leadership that he exhibits as a Liverpool player on the pitch, there's an actual marked difference in that Liverpool side when Henderson is on the pitch versus when he's not on the pitch. And even within Liverpool's own fan base, I remember when we signed Fabinho, and people were thinking, "Oh yeah, finally we can get rid of Jordan Henderson from the holding midfield role," and it's just complete rubbish. He is an absolute world-class footballer. Certainly on form. I don't know, maybe overall, but I think on form this season, I think he's been world-class in the context of the Premier League. And I think he's Liverpool's best midfielder. I think he's one of the best midfielders England have had in the past 10 years. And we will see, hopefully, this form continue into the Euros next year.
Yeah, and both midfielders kind of. with similar roles, kind of keeping passing moves going, keeping the attack going. Joe, you look like you have something to say.
I think the point of both of these nominees is actually very much the same, although the criticism came from different places. It's that sometimes footballers do things that most fans, or at least some fans, can't understand at face value. Henderson's contribution to Liverpool is clearly so much more complicated than scores the occasional goal, sideways passes. Jorginho's contribution to Chelsea is so much clearly more than a 0 assists for most of last season and a lack of outright goals and defending stats. You only need to look at expected goals and possession vectors and whatnot to work out just how important he is. The salient point of the matter is this, is that playing in especially central midfield is a lot more complicated in terms of contribution than most people think. I'd say they're both good winners. The reason I put Jorginho over Henderson is that this Henderson, I don't even want to call it resurgence. I think it's just people finally appreciating him for the great footballer that he is and always has been. That's been going on for a few years now. Jorginho was absolutely lambasted for the entire of last season, completely unfairly. No one's questioning it this year. Again, for me, he's Chelsea's player of the year, and it's not even close.
Yep, absolutely. We're just going to lose Luke for a few minutes. He'll be back in a sec. I mean, the next one I had in mind was... Oh boy, I nearly clicked something. Let me take a sec. There it is. Breakthrough Player of the Year, and we'll get Luke's thoughts, obviously. But this is the difference between this one and signing of the seasons. Obviously, goes to a player that not necessarily doesn't have to be a new signing necessarily. They're just someone who's taken almighty huge steps to becoming a player that we didn't see, maybe we didn't envisage from them at the start of the season. Instead of asking you for who you think is going to, I will ask you for if there are other options, but the big one I can think of is Adama Traore.
Adama Traore is, one of the names that certainly the mainstream media would spring to mind. I don't ultimately believe in all of the hype surrounding him. I believe in most of it. I think he's had, a fantastic season and has been hands down Wolves' player of the season, if we're going to do that. Is he worth the 70 million price tag that's being attached to him? No, I don't personally think he is. But if you're going to talk about players that have finally reached the heights that were perhaps unfairly expected of him about 5 or 6 years ago, he's definitely there. He's certainly lived up to what was at the time a fairly sizable transfer fee paid out by Wolverhampton Wanderers. So yeah, he's definitely a name to throw in. Two names in honour of Dan Ralph, because I know he would absolutely say Daniel James. No one would have expected Dan James to be the Premier League quality winger/midfielder that he is. Maybe he's tailed off a little bit as the season's gone on, but the fee United paid for him, the contribution he made during that, quite frankly, woeful start to the season, how he was probably the most impressive player in there at that point, Dan James. And considering just how close he came to playing for goddamn Leeds last year as well, a brilliant impact. Another player, although he hasn't got necessarily the stats to talk about it, Carl Henningway's not here, so I know he'd want to throw Aaron Connolly into the mix. Now, Neil Maupay may be a slightly bigger breakthrough in terms of coming from a Championship club to a Premier League club, but it's actually quite unusual that a player comes from the academy and obscurity for several years in this country and comes in and actually is a good striker. On so many occasions, Aaron Connolly has been one of Brighton's best players on the pitch. Does that mean much when you consider how bad Brighton have been in the last few months? Maybe not. I think the ultimate point of this is your immediate suggestion of Adama Traore. I think he is the favourite to win it.
Yeah, Luke. You've just tried. You've heard Luke. You've heard Joe kind of give out his options. I mentioned Adama Traore at the start being one of the players you would think is up there for sure. Are there any others that come to mind or?
I missed like a little bit of this discussion. Have you chucked Chaglas Soyuncu into the mix?
No, go for it.
He'd be my pick. I think he came in. I actually think he's been helped a lot by Johnny Evans. I think he's been Leicester's best defender this year. I think Johnny Evans is an absolutely fantastic footballer. So experienced and just offers so much to that Leicester backline. But you have to consider that Chaglas Soyuncu's come in and had to replace an £80 million centre back. Whether or not you agree with Maguire being worth that fee, he still had to come in and do that job. I think he's what Soyuncu brings to the Leicester defence. I think he brings that. What amazes me with him every time I watch him is just how calm he is under pressure. given that he's playing in a very demanding system for a centre-back. Brendan Rodgers expects a lot of centre-backs in terms of being able to play the ball. They're also left quite exposed in his systems often. That's kind of been negated a little bit by Wilfred Ndidi's presence. But Soyuncu, he's so quick. I've not seen anyone beat him in a race. Even Mo Salah struggled to get past him at times. He's absolutely rapid. He's strong. He's good in the air. And he's also come in with an actual bit of pressure on him and done fantastically well. So I think you'd have to consider him. I'd also question Adama Traore's credentials a little bit. People, purely because he's been about, he's had this fantastic season so far, but he has been about before the season, whereas the likes of Soyuncu haven't really. So I think it kind of has to go to play like that. You mentioned Dan James. I think he'd be an absolutely fantastic option. He's been a really good player. Another player I mentioned earlier, Gabriel Martinelli at Arsenal. He's been wonderful.
Yeah.
You can even chuck Mason Greenwood in there as well. More Europa League. That's true. That's very true. I was more talking players in the Premier League. I'd probably consider those kinds of players. Yeah, I think that's probably fair. I'd say Dan James, Adama Traore, debating on the credentials, but my pick would 100% be Chagla Soyuncu.
If I can just
you got Mason
quick,
Mount as well. You got a couple of ones at Chelsea. Mason Mount.
Mason Mount. I think all three of these players sort of faded after the first couple of months in terms of their immediate output. Soyuncu's definitely not been as impressive since the Christmas period as he was in the first few months. You could say exactly the same about Dan James and especially Mason Mount, who for me has gone a long way down from what was expected and seen of him early in the season. I agree with Soyuncu completely.
Yeah, I'm going to give honourable
where he looked better than Maguire. Honestly,
I'm going to give some honourable mentions to the Norwich boys of Todd Cantwell being one of them. He tailed off a little bit, but like the fact that no one had really known much about him, and then he kind of came into the season and he produced some good performances, and now his links with a move away. That's certainly worth mentioning. Max Aarons, you could also put in that list. There's a lot of people that
Buendia, yeah, snap.
Well, Timu Pukki. Not many people knew about him. He obviously, he came in and for the first 10 games or so looked like he'd take the league and set the league on fire. There's a lot. There's so many players who you can chuck into this kind of, who have made giant strides this season. And maybe that's a reflection of how the middle, or let me say the fourth to 10th place teams have kind of been competitive. Maybe it's more a bit of that, but yeah, it's certainly been an interesting one. But I think Soyuncu for sure, he definitely has been very good for them. And yeah, he and Evans. Everyone wondered about Maguire going, but he certainly made them not regret that move too much. I'm looking for the BBC. They put surprise package, which I guess is sort of breakthrough, and that they did give it to Adama Traore. So they chose to do that. They also gave Dean Henderson signing of the season. So it's a fair play. What else have we got? We've got best VAR rant. This is one I'm looking forward to. The best
anytime Jack Butler is on Super Saturday.
Yeah. We could just make it that. I'm trying to think who else.
It hits his arm, and then Luke just looks over and goes, that quite clearly hit him in the midriff, Jack.
Oh, man. Yeah, you could definitely... I imagine if Kylan Stillwood was not in the hosting chair for much of the season with VAR, I imagine he'd be a candidate too. I can definitely see him having a go at VAR. But yeah, for sure, Jack Butler... I think I'm sure a lot of managers had a go at it as well, and probably a lot of pundits as well. But should we keep it local and just say Jack Butler?
Yeah.
Cool. That's his. I mean, yeah. If that's his legacy at RAW Sport, then so be it. Let's have a look. I'm just going to consult my list. I mean, the ones that we've got left really are the big ones, really, right? Manager of the season, player of the season, and team of the season. So which one would you guys want to talk through first?
Manager.
Yeah. Is it straightforward as saying Jurgen Klopp?
No.
Jurgen Klopp.
Okay. Oh,
I would chuck Chris Wilder in the mix.
Right. We'll do it like a first take debate show style. We'll have Joe with Jurgen Klopp and Luke with Chris Wilder. Joe, do you want to make the case for Jurgen Klopp first?
I mean, for me, I feel like it's an open and shut case. Chris Wilder has been given an awful lot of, and rightly so, he's been given an awful lot of praise for what he's done with Sheffield United. What I have concerns about is how the seemingly simple things that Chris Wilder has actually put into the Sheffield United team are seen as massive breakthroughs when they're clearly not. The amount of praise he's been given for systems where one striker moves forward and the other moves back, pulling a centre-back with him. I mean, the fact that that is regarded as advanced tactics for me is unbelievably suspect, to say the least, in terms of inverting your centre-backs during defensive periods of play as well. Again, I don't see that as an impressive thing. I've known about that since I was a kid, to be honest. So I don't know why he's been given an awful lot of praise. Maybe, again, this is an issue with the fans that we alluded to with Jorginho and Henderson earlier. He's definitely in the mix, though. I mean, Sheffield United, I said they would finish 20th at the beginning of the year, so let's not downplay his achievement whatsoever. But for me, Jurgen Klopp, it's an open and shut case manager of the year. We're not talking about what happened to Liverpool in the Champions League because this is a Premier League awards show. Liverpool have lost one game for this entire season. They brought in one player who was a free agent released by West Ham United. They've been hit by injuries far more so than Manchester City were, losing crucial players for several months, losing the best goalkeeper in the league, Alisson Ramsey-Becker, for a significant portion of the season. Midfield completely overhauled, Jordan Henderson having his best season, and my God, is that saying something? Being able to account for the amount of mistakes Mo Salah makes with just how much Sadio Mane's improved to this season. The list just goes on. Liverpool, they are by far and away the best team in the Premier League. And yet, if you look at investment, they really should not be as far ahead as they are. Now, yes, you could make the criticism of other teams in the top six who have failed to impress. Man City have gone off the cliff relative to how they've been in the last couple of years. United have structural problems. Arsenal and Tottenham, let's not even go there. But Liverpool are the best team in this country. And really, there is a case to say they're the best team in Europe at the moment. For me, it's an open and shut case. Jurgen Klopp is manager of the year.
Right, and now... Right, so interesting. So now we'll have Luke make the case for Chris Wilder, if you'd like to do so.
So the problem, the one issue that I find with Joe's argument, I mean, Joe covered a lot of the bases. I can't even begin to say anything negative about Jurgen Klopp. He's the best manager I've seen at Liverpool in my lifetime. I'm not going to even touch that conversation because I think he's been wonderful. The key difference with Chris Wilder, and the one reason I'd have him over Jurgen Klopp, is the fact that he's taken a side who were... this group of players he's got are not household names by any stretch of imagination. You look at the backline he's got. I'm actually struggling to name it. It's like, was Egan? Egan's one of them. I can't remember the other two.
Lundstrom?
No, Lundstrom's a midfielder. But this is the point. These are not household names that Chris Wilder is working with. And what he's done is he's not just created a side that plays attractive football. He's played on a side that plays attractive football and actually gets themselves up the table. We saw a couple of seasons where we saw Burnley get themselves into 7th place. That was just by doing the absolute basics of football, by defending well and getting goals on the counter-attack and through crosses. What Chris Wilder's done is he has proven that on a budget you can play attractive football and do well in the Premier League, and that for me is above and beyond anything that any other manager has done. For as long as I can remember, maybe you could look at the last season, but even then they were playing quite defensive football. This Sheffield United side doesn't have good players, and yet it still produces good performances. You also look at the tactics side of things, Joe. You might call it simplistic. But I would say, that football management is far beyond tactics as well. You look at how Chris Wilder conducts himself in front of the press. I think he's one of the most humble managers. He's very open to admitting when he thinks he's got things wrong. And at the same time, he seems to keep all the fans at Sheffield United on side. And that's why they've been able to produce such good form, because he's been able to generate an atmosphere around the club that is unlike anything I've seen in the Premier League for a newly promoted side in a very long time.
I don't know where Josh has disappeared to. I think the salient point coming out of this... Oh, yeah, hold on, he's back.
No, I liked having the two of you side by side, the two of you arguing the different points. I mean, both compelling points, both deserved winners of Manager of the Season.
They're the top two by a mile, I think, is the salient point coming out of this. I don't think it's a case of, there have been others that have done well. So Nuno Santo, after a dreadful start, has had a great season there. But no one else comes close to either of these two, irrespective of who you think is number one. It may even be a case actually of putting it to the RAW Sport Twitter and seeing who wins out there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Unless
and
Josh
we
will have
definitely,
the casting vote.
spin it into a.
I'm
No, I
happy-
don't. No, I
I'm
think that.
happy for
Go for it.
either. So for me, I'm happy to concede one of them if the team of the season. So if we give manager of the season to Klopp, then we give team of the season to Sheffield United, or we give team of the season to Liverpool, or manager of the season to Chris Wilder, because you can't really have both, in my opinion. Because it's got to be about the
Okay.
impact the manager has on a team, and if they've already got the best team, then it doesn't really.
Or team of the season, if you're going to give it to like the first 11 team of the season, it demands that every component within the team has been unbelievably impressive. Sheffield United, yes, there are a lot of players that do well, an awful lot of players that do extremely well in that system and don't get the credit they deserve. So David McGoldrick, for example, as a striker, very frequently regarded as their best player on match days by the fans, hasn't got a single Premier League goal, but no one cares because, funnily enough, a striker can do a lot more than just score goals. But there are also players in the Sheffield United system who don't contribute anywhere near as much to that. You take that over to Liverpool, I don't spot a weak link. You know, the fullbacks are comfortably the best pair in the Premier League. The centre-backs are excellent. They've got the best goalkeeper in the league, which again is, yes, they paid an awful lot of money for him, but you need to credit them for keeping him at that level. The midfield, which we've already alluded to, is better than it's ever been. Up front, Firmino had his problems scoring at Anfield. Salah makes mistakes, but it's still the deadliest front three in the Premier League, in my opinion. If we're going to do this as you suggest, Luke, I would be more inclined to give Liverpool team of the season than Sheffield.
I think that's fair.
All right. Yeah, sounds like a fair split between those two. I mean, it's very interesting that we're awarding them the same award for a completely different set of circumstances, right? One team has completely blown away the competition, and you'd put them there, and then there's one team that's blown away their expectations and have elevated themselves beyond what people thought. So yeah, it's very interesting that they've both put themselves in that position from completely different circumstances.
The interesting one would be actually at the end of the season, and I don't think you can say this now purely because of their form in the new year, but actually Brendan Rodgers at Leicester, the start they had, absolutely exceptional.
Yeah.
What would maybe put Rodgers' name in the hat for me is if we see this season out and Leicester now have another good run of form, because they've had a difficult bit, and part of management is being able to get your team out of ruts. Rodgers hasn't quite done that with Leicester yet, so I'd be interested to see what happens at the end of the season. Looking back on Leicester, will we be seeing them as a team that rocketed ahead in the first few weeks and then fell off as the season went on? In which case, you probably couldn't give Rodgers the title of best manager. But if they improve and they go on to solidify third place, absolutely no issues whatsoever, then he'd have to be in the conversation for me.
Yeah, I would. Duncan Ferguson had that 3-game spell where he remained unbeaten. So as a joke candidate, I'd put him down. But in all seriousness, Carlo Ancelotti has also turned Everton around.
He has.
And if he
also had a very, very good season with Southampton as well, turned them around after that embarrassing defeat they had. Against Leicester, I think there's definitely been it says a lot by the sheer lack of sackings we've seen this season.
That is a good point, actually.
Other than Watford, but they seem to go through a manager every 2 minutes. I'm just trying to think of other managers who've been sacked. Pochettino.
and Spurs.
And Emery, but that's more or less that's more or less
20% of the league. It's not. It's not the highest turnover that we've seen.
No.
And also, it's weird, I guess, because maybe it's a cultural thing, but now it's become there are a lot of these coaches in the league right now are not, those names of Pardew, Allardyce, Pulis. They're not like these. They're now people who are now trusted to see out their vision for the club, and it's very interesting that none of these seem to be short-term hires as such, which maybe is a changing thing. Let's try and create a team of the season, and I'm gonna have to try and put a banner together for that.
Take ages.
Oh god.
But how many Liverpool players would you have in that team?
I think I'd have half the team of Liverpool players personally.
Okay. So for goalkeeper, are we saying I mean, Dean Henderson's obviously up there. I've seen mentioned.
I want to put Bernd Leno into the mix. I probably
Okay.
wouldn't pick him, but I think he deserves a mention. He's made such a difference to that Arsenal defence this year. I think he's a genuinely world-class goalkeeper. Probably, yeah, I would say him. I think you've also got to chuck Alisson. I don't actually think Alisson's been as good this year as he was last year, which would probably be the one thing where I kind of go, I wouldn't necessarily go near him, but he's still, in my opinion, the best goalkeeper, even if he hasn't had his best season. So if you want to go for the absolute best goalkeeper in the league, I'll go for Alisson. If you're looking at keepers who have had very good seasons and made an impact on their team, I think Leno, Henderson, and actually Vicente Guaita at Crystal Palace as well. All three of those you could also put in.
Yeah, for sure. I Martin Dubravka at Newcastle, when called upon, has done a very good season. Who do we want to give it to? Should we give it to one of the 3 or 4 aforementioned guys who, besides Alisson, have had good seasons? Or Joe, you seem lost in thought there.
It depends on what the criteria of what each position goes to. My initial vote was going to be Alisson by a country mile, but if you're talking about the impact of a player relative to that quality, I think Dean Henderson would probably be my pick.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a pick I can get behind. And he's had a fantastic season. So should we say Dean Henderson then?
Yeah, suits me.
Cool. And then in terms of the back 4, I'm gonna sort of speak for you guys and guess that Robertson will be in there, or do we think any other left backs?
I don't think there's been a better left back in the league than Andy Robertson this year.
Yep, right. So that he's in. Are we saying Alexander-Arnold to shoe in at right back?
100%.
Shout out Ricardo Pereira at Leicester, but I don't think he's even impact wise. I don't think he's quite on the same level.
I've never seen a top team build their team around their right back. And Liverpool have done that with a 21-year-old Trent Alexander-Arnold. He is an unbelievable player. I'm excited to see where his career is going to go, if he's going to stick at right back into his mid to late 20s. But for now, he's revolutionised that right back position. He will go down as this season, and last season, the assists he gets, Trent will go down as one of the best right backs in Premier League history by the time we're looking at his best by the end of his career, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep, no doubt. You see how many of the attacks start on the right flank given to him. That just speaks volumes. Alexander-Arnold on the right, Robertson on the left. So I think Soyuncu, can we put him there in centre back?
I'd rather have Evans. I think Evans has been better than Soyuncu this season. Yeah, Johnny Evans is so underrated. I think because the difference with Soyuncu is because obviously he's had the Maguire comparison. Evans has been the mainstay, the continuation in the back line for Leicester from last year, and he's just been so consistent in there. I think I think he'd be a worthy place in our starting 11.
So, and the impulse is to say Van Dijk.
Yeah, Van Dijk.
Joe.
I don't think he's been as impressive as he was last year, but you could say that. I mean, it doesn't really say an awful lot when he was the first name on the team sheet last year, and when we were discussing this on Raw 12:51 AM, we basically skipped discussion of Virgil van Dijk because he was so far ahead of anyone else. So, yeah, Van Dijk and Evans, that works.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite
Harry Maguire for the impact he's had on that Manchester United backline. I think he's a very good defender. I think Evans, just the impact he has. I'm saying Evans purely because I think he's gone under the radar and he doesn't have a price tag attached to him. But Harry Maguire is equally a very good defender. But I'd say Evans and Van Dijk could be a fair centre back pairing.
Yeah, as you guys kind of alluded to with Sheffield United, I think their centre backs have done pretty well as well. I am not saying they'd go above the ones we've mentioned, but they've had good seasons. Just having a look, I think Connor Cody, considering Willy Bolly's been injured for a significant part of the season, I feel like Connor Cody has kind of had to step up for Wolves, and he's done that.
I don't rate Connor Cody as a defender. I think he's a very good passer, but I think he's very good in Santo's system. I don't think he's the best centre back. in the world. I'd say, dare say, I think if Wolves want to go for a top 4 position, I'm not sure he's the kind of centre back they want to be having in their defence.
Interesting. Okay. Tyrone Mings as well had a good start to the season as well.
Yeah,
so,
fell off.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Much like their form, really.
Yeah.
So let's put that down. That's what we've got so far. Now, I don't know. Obviously, you guys are, Eurozone podcast, so you obviously know a lot about like tactics. How do we want to do this? How do we want to do this midfield forward?
Most teams set with a 4-3-3.
Should we do that?
Or
including,
like some variation of it.
Including the team that has absolutely rinsed the rest of the league. So yeah. I'm game for a 4-3-3.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know how you guys want to structure it, but I mean, of the midfielders, I think Jordan Henderson. We put. I mean, I know
Jordan Henderson, Kevin De Bruyne, Mateo Kovacic, and my midfield 3.
Interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
Joe.
I'd go Jorginho over Kovacic, but Jordan Henderson and Kevin De Bruyne are for me non-negotiable. They have to be in there.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm guessing it's mainly because of the Man United fans and BBC Sport. BBC Sport did a similar lineup. They had Fernandes, which is an interesting one, but I think Kovacic and Jorginho under the radar have produced some very solid seasons.
I think you could go for either of them. I'd be happy with either of them to be in that team. Chelsea deserve its player in the team of the season. I think Fran Lampard's done a really good job there. The difference with Kovacic for me is that Jorginho, he plays a set role and he plays it incredibly well. Probably better than any other midfielder in the Premier League, to be honest. I just think Kovacic, in terms of his impact across the field for Chelsea, particularly where N'Golo Kanté hasn't had his best season, Kovacic just really stepped up and provided a proper box-to-box option, box-to-box playmaking option in Chelsea's lineup. So I would personally put him in, but again, I'm not going to die on this hill. Jorginho is an equally exceptional option.
Yeah. Again, I have no real preference between those two. Kovacic sounds good to me. Joe?
I'm good for either. I do take Luke's point actually that Jorginho is far more of a role player than a system player that Jorginho is. That Kovacic is, I should say. He has again had an under the radar season because I think a lot of the attention at Chelsea as the media in this country is on the young English players they have. The truth is that these 2 European midfielders have had absolutely the best seasons of any player at that club. I'm game to go for either. If we're going to go 4-3-3 with Henderson at the back, maybe it suits the team a little bit more to have Kovacic ahead. But the simple truth is you can't go wrong with either of them.
My one honourable mention, I'm going to try and do one of these whenever I can. Wilfred Ndidi at Leicester.
Yes. Yes.
I think
his impact on Leicester.
It's made obvious by the fact that Leicester's form became bad the moment he got injured. He's a real important cog in terms of protecting that back line in a Rodgers system as well. Being able to do that, I think he's a really good player. I'd put him maybe on the bench.
Yeah,
second midfielder on the bench.
I think. Yeah. Sure. So I guess that leaves us to the front 3. And I'm gonna just rattle off who I think we're gonna have in. Sadio Mane. Probably Mo Salah. Are we saying Mo Salah?
For certain.
And who do you want to put as?
Aguero.
I mean, Aguero. The BBC Sport put Aguero. Okay, so Luke agrees with that. Joe.
I mean, the thing is, I always have that moment of doubt with Mo Salah when I think about the mistakes he makes, which weren't in his game a couple of years ago, and how simple a lot of those mistakes are. But then you just look at what he does when he's not making mistakes, how he's still devastating in terms of stats, how he terrifies any defender when they come up against him. Yeah, so I think Salah has to be in there. Mane as well. Now that Eden Hazard's not in the league, I don't think there's a player on that left side that comes close. Earlier in the season, you could have perhaps said Raheem Sterling, but he's actually had a pretty dreadful last couple of months. No goal contributions in his last, I believe, 9 match days. Sadio Mane, obviously that's just not a problem. Thinking about Manchester United, players like Dan James, great though they've been at times, they really don't come close to this. I'm trying to think if there's a winger lower down the league that could
The
be
only one you
considered.
could say is Jack Grealish, but
No.
even then, in terms of if you're going for impact on their respective club, I
Jamie
think
Vardy?
Grealish certainly is a massive part of that Aston Villa side. I don't think he warrants a role in this in this team.
If we go in like
I think a front three of Salah, Aguero, and Mane is very hard to argue with.
there's no one else.
We haven't really mentioned Jamie Vardy. Does he get in at all? Does he get a shout at all?
Faded a little bit. I don't think he's as good as Aguero as a player. I really do think Vardy's a fantastic footballer and he's so good in a counter-attacking system. I just think Aguero's a better player.
He's also the most prolific striker in the history of the Premier League, Aguero. Most goals per game.
Yeah. The other one that comes to mind is Aubameyang, simply because of how many times he's kind of rescued Arsenal from a bad result or so. But yeah, Aguero is definitely a good shout. I think it's more people. I guess people don't really see it because I think City, the problem City have had the back and their general regression. Aguero's form's been lost in that, I reckon. So yeah, good, decent shout. I don't know. I mean, we can produce a bench. I'm good, but we can just rattle off a few names that we'd have as as an honourable mention / on the bench. I'm guessing Alisson might be there.
Yeah, if we're going to stick with Liverpool, Joe Gomez again. The fact he's keeping out Joel Matip out of the side says everything. He's a really good centre back, and England are very lucky to have him. Harry Maguire, as we've already mentioned, Aaron Wan-Bissaka. Any other year, he might have been a very viable option as a right back. I just think he's obviously up against Trent Alexander-Arnold, and then you probably even put him third after Ricardo Pereira. But yeah, I think there's definitely a good few players you could have on that bench.
Yeah, Joe.
Yeah.
I think we've already been through the midfielders. In particular, Jorginho would be the first name on that bench if we're going Kovacic over him.
Wilfred Ndidi, we've said.
Ndidi for the defensive option there. Up front, backup winger and striker for the final two positions on the bench might be interesting, but I don't think there's a huge amount of options that immediately spring to mind. Maybe Raheem Sterling.
No, I'd put Mahrez over Sterling. Mahrez has had a pretty good season this year. You could also maybe say Fernandinho in central midfield. I think he's had a really difficult job this year. I think he's aging and he's been mucked about by Guardiola because they haven't had a proper centre back with Laporte injured.
You can only go by what you've seen, but both Rodri and Fernandinho have been screwed in no uncertain terms this year.
Yeah.
Honestly, Fernandinho made RAW Sport Team of the Season 2 years in a row. Rodri could well have made it this year as well in that sort of holding midfield role. He just hasn't been given the chance whatsoever. And the fact that he's not been able to prove himself as one of the biggest and best signings of last summer is honestly sad, because last season he was unbelievable at Atletico. It's a shame that we just haven't seen any of it.
Yeah, I think it might be one of those things like Fabinho needed a season to kind of bed in, and then at the start of the season he was brilliant. So maybe it's one of those kind of things. I guess that just leaves us with player of the season to kind of wrap off. And am I right in saying that it's a 2-horse race between De Bruyne and Henderson, or maybe even Mane? Maybe
it's a 1-horse race. It's De Bruyne. Mm-hmm. Every time I see Kevin De Bruyne play, he's best player on the pitch. He is the perfect midfielder. But he can pass ball 50 yards with both feet. He can smack him in from distance. His crossing ability is, I think, unparalleled in the league. Even the likes of Trent Alexander-Arnold, I don't think touch Kevin De Bruyne's crossing ability. He's far away the best player in the league. With Hazard gone, I don't think there's a more talented footballer in the Premier League right now, and Kevin De Bruyne is just an actually magical footballer. For me, far and away player of the season.
It's funny that because all the other names that we talk about are Liverpool players, and with the exception of Jordan Henderson, there's actually been debates across this season that these players have been weaker than they were last year. Alisson, arguably not as unbelievable as he was last year. Van Dijk, that kind of anomalous no dribbles past stat, with the exception, I think, Mikel Merino, that's no longer the case, but ultimately he's not been at that same ridiculous level as he was last year. Same goes for Salah. You could even argue Mane as well, certainly for Firmino. Kevin De Bruyne has retained his ridiculous form from a couple of years ago after an absurd injury, which basically wiped out last season for him. It's very rare that a player, especially at his level, can play anywhere near the same level as him after an injury like that. Kevin De Bruyne is absolutely, for me, at the level that he was before. And now that speaks wonders about what could be a fantastic injury prevention program in terms of getting players back up to fitness at Manchester City. But the simple truth is that Kevin De Bruyne was the best midfielder in the Premier League before he got injured. He had a massive injury, and he still is. And I honestly don't think he's worse than when he won, runner-up Player of the Year with us a couple of years ago. Salah ended up getting it that year in his first year at Liverpool. But no, I think De Bruyne for me is. I completely agree with everything Luke said. Best player in the league.
I can get why people are saying Henderson, purely because of the impact that he does have on that Liverpool side. I just think in pure footballing terms, as a player, Kevin De Bruyne is on a whole other level to Jordan Henderson. Jordan Henderson is a great player. I think he's had a world-class season, and I think he's a very good footballer.
Best captain in the league as well.
Best captain in the league, 100%, not even close. The inspiration he has on the Liverpool side. But De Bruyne, just as a pure footballer, is top 5 players in the world. Just another level on top of Jordan Henderson. There's not to say Henderson's a bad player, because he's really not, but De Bruyne's just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, there's no real good argument you can make against De Bruyne's candidacy. I think it's almost like he was a new signing when he lined up for I think the first game was West Ham for City, and they'd won the title last year. Then to get him back as well was just a bonus, and yeah, he's been fantastic. That I think should do it. We've gone about an hour and a half. That's pretty good. I didn't think we would get as much of a conversation as we did, but yeah, it's pretty good stuff. My thanks to Luke and Joe for joining me. We will be back next Saturday for Super Saturday. As of Wednesday, I don't think Wednesday is going to be our sort of interview-ish time, but we haven't got anything lined up as of yet. If we do, then we will let everyone know. But my thanks for you guys both for joining me. Next week, Bundesliga Super Saturday German edition. Hopefully, we will get that on. And yeah, everyone have a good weekend, and we will see you back soon.